Norris. We're back today to discuss mostly more breaking down some points with an interview that was on cbathletics.com. Again, we'll link up that URL for you. But it was an interview with a Dr. Digby Sale, a former gymnast who is now with McMaster University. Again, McMaster's done a lot of great exercise studies, and he's had some influence on the research community in exercise science. And there was a lot of good points that we just decided, well, for today's episode, we'll kind of just break down that one particular interview. We'll finish up with some demonstration of some of the principles that we're going to mention in this segment here. So Skyler, you had kind of pointed us to this interview, and in a portion of it there was an allusion to a lot of unpublished research, and one of those was kind of this training with one-arm splits. I guess discuss that a little bit more, kind of what you can remember from the protocol and then the conclusions.
Sure. So he had college athletes over 3 years, which is a really long time, in which they had one arm being trained with I believe it was somewhere between a 4 and a 6 rep max, so reasonably heavy weight, bicep curl, elbow flexor exercise, and then the other was doing a 9 to 11 rep max. And they maintained this differentiation over the course of 3 years, and what they found at the end of this time period was that the hypertrophy and the strength were the same regardless of the rep range. Even though perhaps conventional wisdom might say that the slightly higher rep range, the 8 to 12 repetition, is hypertrophy, and the lower rep range is more strength oriented. In the end, they both came out about the same. And I forget the total number of individuals they had in the study, but it was a large enough sample size to where you could draw a reasonable conclusion from this. And then, so that was, he said, there are other studies that kind of refute this, but it was something we thought was really interesting. And he almost seemed to be saying it as an aside. And then this reminded me of something that was posted on Clarence Bass's website from there was a research review done in 1998 by Dr. Cardinelli of Adelphi University, and he did a meta-analysis of all these studies, and everywhere from 6 rep max and below, all the way up to over 20 rep max, taking the fatigue. And the thing that matters is really pushing to those end repetitions, and it didn't. Going over 20 seemed impractical because of the pain and lactic acid buildup. And under 6 rep max seemed to be impractical for a lot of people because of the skill involved. Olympic lifters train multiple times a day, not because they are superhuman. They've survived to that level, but also because there's so much skill in taking a bar from the floor and putting it over your head, and you need to grease that groove. But for someone who's training to get bigger and stronger, not necessarily for sport performance, they found that the 6 to 20 rep max range worked. And that's not what Digby was saying necessarily all the way up to 20 repetitions, but Dr. Cardinelli's recommendation was kind of in the same vein, that you got to bring the intensity regardless of the rep range.
Yeah, intensity is key. Pick a rep range and go with it, and throw the max amount of intensity you can at it. You're going to make progress. But what would really be cool is if these volunteers had a third arm, so that we could actually do a mix and match of these two protocols, because I really feel like that it's not one or the other, but it's actually a good conjugate mixing of through the rep ranges. And if I had the money to bet, I would say that if this person had a third arm and they trained that way, they would get a little bump. So they would actually end up, that's just my guess, but I think there is something to be said for the intelligent mixing and matching of rep schemes. And again, I don't know the mechanism behind that. I don't claim to know the mechanism, but it's a gut feeling that I have.
Another thought that came to my mind with this arm split thing is there something within each n equals 1, taking down each participant in this informal study. I guess my point is, we all, might have slight subtle differences between a right arm and a left arm anyway, but what I'm getting at is, isn't there some limitations, if you will, of the body? Let's say you had an untrained arm versus a trained arm for 3 years. In my opinion, is the body going to really have that much of a differentiation at the end of 3 years between, they didn't do this, but what if one arm was totally untrained?
Sure.
Would that prove that actually, it's a stimulus, not as specific of a stimulus, it's just a stimulus that's most important, not necessarily, it just had to target that particular arm, that particular set of muscles. I don't know.
They need some boulders, is what they need. And I'm not kidding, because inevitably, it's not like, say, baseball, where you're throwing with one arm, but then you're also batting with the other, and there's at least some amount of.
Actually, tennis players are a good example of it, because you can look at like Rafael Nadal. You can visibly see, if you take a notice, in his case, I think it's his left arm is bigger than his right arm. Of course, the volume there is pretty significant, but nonetheless, and I know I played tennis way back when too, and right forearm was bigger than left forearm. It just, the usage of it. But
to this day, my left calf from jumping in basketball is still larger than my right calf, even after all the calf work I've done. Both of them.
But I guess my bet would be that there's probably most of the emphasis is on stimulus of some type, and an intense stimulus would be better, as opposed to, what this arm did versus that arm did. I don't know. That's my guess, though.
And it's difficult, because I have to go back and see what his interview said, but it seemed like if you're a college athlete, that's not a weekend word, it's a college athlete, you've already got a decent genetic hand to get you to that level regardless of your sport. So, I wonder what sport they were picking, because if you had maybe football players all roughly in the same position, then it's not like someone is a 5'8", fullback, and then another guy is a 6'9" rower, and those are going to have different leverages and different, possibly, responses. Because the big guy's not going to be able to move nearly as much weight with as much coordination because of the length of his forearm. You do a dragon forward soon.
And Keith, what was a highlight or something that stuck out to you with that?
One thing I would have really liked to have seen is the instantaneous power generation. That would have been very interesting to measure that, along with the muscle hypertrophy, and to see how these different rep ranges affect instantaneous power generation. And I don't know exactly how a study like that could be put together, but I think that would be interesting too. The rapid force development of the muscle, that plays a huge part, and it depends on. And again, we get back to what are you training for? If we're training purely for hypertrophy, well, we don't have to worry so much about power generation. If we're training for athletics, that's all. Well, I wouldn't say that's all, but it's pretty much what determines our athletic ability is the power to body weight ratio. Skills being equal, the athlete with the highest power to body weight ratio is going to be the better athlete.
See, this is very strange though, because you can look at I guess the steroid era has existed for a long time in Olympic athletics, but we'll compare who was the Canadian who did all the gear but had like a 600-pound double for a squat and lost his gold medal after beating Carl Lewis.
Ben Johnson.
Ben Johnson.
Yeah.
At one point, this is a guy who. There's almost, I hesitate to say a protege because I'm not implying drug use, but he's an enormous English sprinter. He looks like he would be a bodybuilder, and he does something like a 625-pound squat for a double kind of thing. And he's a high-level sprinter. He's always in the final heat, and yet he's way stronger even at his body weight than say like a Usain Bolt, but Bolt's much faster. So then you go, how much the hypertrophy definitely seems to help as we've seen sprinters get bigger over the years, but then at what point the old training of the nervous system, which is the final frontier, how do you exploit that? And then inevitably somebody's going to have faster reaction times that you can't build upon. That's an innate. And so it's not like poo-pooing hypertrophy. It seems like hypertrophy puts you in a better position to have power, more muscle tissue, all things being equal. It's interesting.
Yeah, and the kind of the RFD that Keith was alluding to is kind of what stuck out to me too. And you said innate. I think there's definitely some innate qualities there, with some people have it or not. But I think there's also, and Digby Sale alluded to this too, a very specific, trigger, if you will, getting out of the blocks on a sprint, for example. That is a very specific, firing, if you will. And, how does that relate to the weight room? Of course, you get 100 different opinions if you had 100 different strength and conditioning coaches in here. What I kind of found interesting is can you train the CNS? How can you improve that? And the study that really kind of stuck out to me that he alluded to was one that, again, maybe I'll try to link it up here in the editing process, but where the RFD could be improved whether the velocity was actually fast or not. In other words, I think he said, you could take several different athletes and put a bar connected to a strain gauge and see, in 0.5 seconds what each one did. And I think that's, another way to say, well, you can improve or train the CNS to a certain degree. What is that instantaneous power output? And can you measure that? So, and not that Olympic lifting can't do that, but it might definitely, you take a Usain Bolt or probably even a, I don't know if Dwight Howard can.
Dwight Howard's
can power lift. I mean, can Olympic lift or not? I can see that he's strong, but I'm just trying to think of people with long levers that are still muscular. Are they going to necessarily display that in an Olympic lift? I don't know if they would or not.
Yeah, there's a video of Dwight Howard on YouTube bench pressing like well over 315, something closer to 385. It's just like blah blah blah. Just cranking these things out.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable. But that force gauge strain. It's one of the things, Jackson. There's a blog I follow. I think it's called jumpcoach.com or what have you, because we've got Charles Austin down in who's an Olympic gold medalist, and then he also, I think he holds the record for the highest high jump over the age of 40 at over 7 feet at the age of 41. And he's down in San Marcos, and he's got this video clip of him up on YouTube where it's like standing vertical is 35 plus inches, and then so of course when he does his running vertical, it ends up being even more than that because of all, of course, the technique too. But one of the things that that you're seeing jumpers doing a lot of is I think they call it cadence squats, or where they would squat down and they would hit depth, and then the coach would clap, and then they would come up. So there would be a pause at the bottom, and then practicing redeveloping all of that force.
That's why some people like the box squat too. The development of that.
Sure. Yeah. As long as you don't turn it into a good morning. I mean, well, really. I mean, my best box squat with the easy squat bar was 400 pounds, but I came off of it and I turned it into a good morning, which is what you see a lot of people doing. And so without the box, you don't do that. You stay down, and and as a result, you don't need a lot of weight.
Yeah.
The rock you can't transfer the rock up. So.
Whereas Louis Simmons will say that a max effort squat really is a good morning to parallel. I mean, the way that he teaches it.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. But he did kind of go into. He wasn't really poking fun. I mean, you can't tell always when you're reading, but the stability training, he had some interesting kind of dysfunctional training or stability training. How beneficial is it to have somebody standing on a balance ball and trying to press overhead or whatever.
Sure.
Basically, that when you get back to specificity, that's kind of crap to have someone do that, because unless you're in a sport where you're standing on a ball and you're trying to press a bar overhead.
I think it was Ripto who said when he finally gave up his CSCS certification, and he was one of the Mark Ripto was one of the guys who originally wrote the certification. He gave it up when they published the study and gave it merit that pressing on a Bosu ball was equivalent to like a max effort bench press on a solid bench with a lot of power. And I can see why you need that up too, but there's always the qualifying the statement. Certainly in the context in which they were presenting it, it would make you irritated. But we talked about it before. Unstable platforms seem to do something for a temporary burst of power, and there seems to be it seems to be very helpful in joint recovery, in teaching people to pack the rotator cuff, or make the rotator cuff pack the shoulder into the joint when they're pressing or doing, unstable pull-ups or ring dips or what have you. It could certainly go too far where, I've messed around with the tongue-in-cheek where I've had my feet in blast straps and my arms in blast straps doing push-ups, and just like, kind of as a joke, like, hey guys, my whole body must be just full activation. Full suspension training. I'm not on the ground at all. Therefore, it's superior to all other forms in which you have any terra firma on you, on it all. But that's kind of where it goes. It's like to see the people who are doing they like jump from ball to ball, boosted ball to boosted ball to demonstrate balance, and then they end up cracking their skull open. It's on YouTube, folks. I mean, if you want to laugh at someone else's expense, it's not a very nice thing to do. Shame on you, but it's there.
Training for Cirque du Soleil.
Cirque du Soleil, then.
Maybe that's the ticket.
That's it. That's it.
That's what you're training for.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Is there the Bosu ball games that we don't know about?
We can start.
We could start them. $1,000 certification for every studio. Bosu fit.
Yeah, and Keith, kind of going back to the RFDs and the can you train the CNS, what are some of your thoughts or practical ways that you try to improve upon that?
Yes. Can it be trained? Yes, I think it can be. To what extent, I don't know. And what exactly is the magic bullet? I don't know that either. So what we try to do is train the spectrum. Since you really don't know what it is that's going to work, then you can do things like you can look at the full spectrum of force production, and you can start from the plyometric end and work that into so you get the ballistic rapid force development, and then you can move into the strength speed end of things. So and I guess what I'm saying is that since this is kind of an unknown area, and it's kind of the opening the closet door, we really don't know what's in there. We get a good feeling that it can be trained. I think that I've seen the response dumbed down more than I've seen it improved, but I have seen it improve. In other words, I've seen very good athletes, younger athletes, that get into weight training and do it the wrong way. In other words, they will go into more of a bodybuilding type routine, and I've seen very quick, explosive athletes lose that explosiveness by following those kinds of routines. So I know it can be dampened, and I know it can be slowed. I've also seen kids come in who are very explosive to begin with, and put them on a steady diet of plyometrics and explosive movements, and I've seen them get even better. But coming back from that, what's interesting is, and I'll use Allison Felix since we're kind of on a track and field kick right now. Allison Felix was an interesting study when she was coming out of high school. She was a fantastic sprinter, 200-meter sprinter. Her coach, who I can't, Barry Ross, thank you. Barry Ross looked at her and said, she was explosive as all hell, springy, quick, all the things you want in a sprinter. What she lacked was strength, just basic strength. And he put her on a steady diet of deadlifts. I mean, the most basic exercise you can get. I mean, that was all she needed, was that extra bit of strength. She took off.
But it wasn't like 8 to 12 rep deadlifts. He was very adamant about near max effort.
Yeah, he was.
Drop the bar, and he's actually refined to the point where athletes don't even go above their knees. It's a partial deadlift now. It's from the ground to your knees. Ground to your knees.
Yeah, and whether that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Whether getting that specific.
Felix compete in 100 and 200 now? I don't know. Or just 200 stuff.
200 is what I remember right now.
Okay. It's not that big of an issue. I just couldn't remember.
But can the central nervous system be trained? Yes, I think it can. Can the rapid force development be trained to be quicker? Yes, I think it can. What are those methods? I don't know, and I don't think anybody does. We're all kind of groping for that method. And I want to say that the trainer out in California, Marinovich, whose name I can't. Marv, thank you. Marv Marinovich out in California has some interesting ideas about that, and whether or not those pan out to be true, you know, that keep an open mind and watch what he's doing out in California. And but because this is the name of the game, power development, instantaneous power development, is really crucial for athletes. But if you're not an athlete, it's kind of like then don't train that way. You don't need to go there, because the big problem with training that way is the injury. The probability for injury increases as you train that way. So if you're not an athlete, if you don't need to train that way, I would not do it. I would back off and do some other safer methods.
Yeah, to juxtapose that, since we're talking about trainers of sprinters who, by very nature, are very much about rate of force development and rapid force development, however you want to parse that up. It reminded me of an article from a trainer up in actually Dallas, a guy by the name of Eric Miner, not the basketball player who did the Miami Heat dunk between the legs.
Sure. Oh yeah.
That guy was awesome. They called him Baby Jordan. He was a horrible basketball player by NBA standards, but great dunker. And so this guy trains a lot of sprinters, Jarvis Patton being his sort of his Allison Phoenix, if you will. And he took the guy who has run, I think, a 9.89 1 year, and before he started training with Eric Miner, he's running 10.17s. So he feels that, you know, we're talking about you made a comment about athletes getting dumbed down with bodybuilding movements. This guy's not pro bodybuilding movements per se, but he says he's against the idea that you should train movements, not muscles, because if you're an athlete and you have, say, weak glutes, that's going to inhibit you, and so you're going to want to do a little bit of isolation work, but not at the expense of the total program. So single joint movements are useless. He feels that's false as well. He doesn't feel plyometrics and Olympic lifts are necessary for rate of force development, especially if you're a sprinter with doing a steady diet of sprinting, which is inherently all rate of force development. You're already doing it.
And again, so you need to need to look at that in this one scenario. What are you doing? What are you training for? What are your weaknesses? Those are the questions you have to ask. And if your glutes are weak and that's what's holding you back, then some isolation work
hip thrusts. American hip thrust. He also, one of the things, the way he emphasizes that sort of rate of force development is, and also trains the hamstrings, is he says a lot of sprinters end up pulling their hamstring, I think what's called the late stage swing through, where it comes out and it's a rapid stretching of the hamstring with a slightly flexed knee, and so he'll have athletes do a 3-second negative, immediate explosive positive, so you're getting this controlled extension, eccentric overload of the hamstring before a rapid force is placed on it to kind of prime them and get used to that, making the power in that position. And I think this Eric Miner character ended up doing 175 pounds, and he ends up doing like 440 for sets of 5 in that fashion, which if you've ever done a 3-second negative on a deadlift, that's a lot of weight. If you've ever done it in that fashion, it's a lot of weight. So it's pretty interesting how it weighs to skin a cat in this case.
Well, and again, I mean, a lot of people, overselling might be a good way to put it, with the Olympic lifting and strength and conditioning circles. And again, I'm not, to say that there aren't some athletes that could benefit from it. Again, I think you alluded to the fact of, even in my opinion, even a valuable athlete, although they're an athlete, they're still valuable in other ways, sometimes financially if you're an owner. I would be kind of pissed off as an owner if I knew that my athletes were going through Olympic lifting 100% of the time, and I owned a basketball team, and those guys aren't leveraged to do that. I would kind of not like that. So it's that that ratio of kind of the risk reward ratio of it, and are there other ways to do it? I think the answer is yes. I think we don't know what's best, and it's probably not one cookie cutter program best for each person or athlete for that matter. But I have seen it in my own experience at UT one year when Olympic lifts were pretty much implemented all throughout the every sport, male and female, and I think it was like 10 out of the 12 softball girls were injured because of the weight room. It's like, that's stupid. Why are you doing that?
They barely have a vertical game to begin with. I mean, it's not picking on girls. Baseball just is not. Unless you're in the outfield jumping up, to try and snag a possible home run, it's not or maybe a high pitch to second base or something. You're not vertical very much. You're not coiling and you're recoiling to create this movement. So why? I mean, you'd have to. Gosh, I can't think of the learning curve for these girls.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to that old the old saying that there are no bad exercises, but there are plenty of bad applications. So you really need to pick the application. Look at your levers. Look at the person you're training. Look at yourself. You know, do you need that? In the case of the softball girls, you know why. You can find plenty of other exercises that are more applicable and they have a less chance of injury. But yeah, I mean, you know, that's kind of back a few years ago where the Olympic lifting was it, and if you did an Olympic lift, you weren't going to get better as an athlete.
Right.
You know, next week it'll be something else.
Yeah, we're in a trend-based industry. It reminds me of a discussion I had with a client of mine who's a golfer, and she actually recently got certified as a personal trainer, and she went to do one of these Titleist seminars, and there was this old strength coach pushing Olympic lifting for high school golfers, and I just
it
was all I can do not to be, and I understand from her point of view she doesn't understand. She explain it and she gets it, but it's one of those things where we've been through so many cycles of this. Olympic lifting is the tits, it's the way to go, and never mind the sport. Well, you can learn to develop glute power and thrust without ever having to have these athletes. It's a skill game. It's a game of skill. You want to the movement that can have the lowest possible chance of injury with these guys. They talk about spending years teaching the Olympic lift with a broomstick. Well, how are your glutes getting strong in the meantime? Why not pick something that's going to get your glutes strong and swing more? I mean, that's just
the repetition of striking the golf ball would seem a little more important. And then sacrifice the teaching of the Olympic lifting. But again, when you said we're kind of in a trend based, and it feeds itself too, because some athletes out there in every sport, every field are going to be successful. Well, what do they do? So that it just starts to feed itself, and when something gets infiltrated, well, that's just going to keep feeding itself for the next decade. And with the advent of Nautilus machines back when, I mean, those kind of got hip for a while for even athletics, and then no one does hit anymore, and it's a cycle, and then again people look at, well, who's winning and what are they doing? Those guys even float around just like the coaches do. So,
what was it? Miami Dolphins, Don Shula, they all had Nautilus equipment during those championship runs in the 70s, and then Dan Riley with the Redskins, and Penn State in the mid 90s when they were really a huge powerhouse. They hit squad. I mean, it'll all come back around again. As a trainer friend of mine, Dave Landau, says, there is nothing new under the sun. Pilates was invented in the 30s, for goodness sakes, and Bosu balls probably right around the same time. In fact, they had some old magazines of the era, and these women with the ball.
Kettlebells.
Kettlebells are there. You go, great example. Low tech, high concept.
Well, we wanted to close with some demonstrations of kind of that speed, strength continuum, and kind of applicable ways to train for various things. And Keith is always saying, what are you training for? So we just kind of wanted to show you with some examples of, hey, maybe you could train this way for this particular application, and show you some demonstrations of that.
I'm going to come off, do a drop, essentially a drop. Stick, hold for a second, plyo right back up. Okay. Rapid force development. So I'm here. Moving on up the continuum from an example of a plyometric or closer to speed strength. Now we've got strength speed. So the movement is a little bit slower. The intent is to move as fast as possible, but the actual movement will be just a little bit slower than what we had over there with the plyometric push-ups. So the intent of this, I'm going to start off at the top on the leverage machine. I'm going to come down under control, and then I'm going to explode up and through, and I'll know if I'm getting a good explosion if the bar comes away from my hand. And I'll continue until the bar doesn't come away from my hand and I know I've hit the edge here. So I come down into control. Right on up the chain here, what we've got is more of a top end strength movement. The idea behind this though is, although here and here the movement was quick, this movement is not going to be, the movement's going to be pretty slow, but the intent to move fast is going to be there. And this is all about intent. So I'm putting the maximum amount of power, and now I've got to sustain that power all the way through for, I think it's about 5 seconds, I believe is what the stroke time is set on this right about now. All right.
3, 2, and hit it. I guess that's about all for now, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Bye.